Hi, Councilor McKeel. Thanks for joining us. Clock by my time. I know we have a few that are still joining us, but for the sake of folks' time and to get us going, I think I'll go ahead and make the introduction, and we'll let folks join us as they can. This is also being recorded and will be put on our website, so we'll be able to share it afterwards as well. So welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many people, and thank you for accommodating us in our virtual open house setting. My name is Suzanne Duffner. I am the Community and Economic Development Director for the City of Monmouth. And tonight we have a special presentation to share with you some information about a project that the city is working on to update our zoning ordinance. And for those of you who may not work with zoning on a day-to-day basis, this, generally speaking, is kind of our rules and regulations that govern the growth and development of the city. So it's a very important city document, and it was last comprehensively updated in 1983, which it has been a while, and a lot has changed in Monmouth, as you can imagine. And so that's really one of the goals of this project, is to help modernize that code and make sure that it's adapted to our current reality and our goals for the community. And one of the main objectives of this open house is to hear from you, our community members, on what you think are some of the changes, what you think about some of those changes that are proposed. And to help facilitate that, we do have some discussion questions that we've prepared that we'll be asking for your feedback on. And then we'll also have the opportunity for some general comments and questions at the end of the presentation. And I just want to point out that we also have an online survey that's going on now through March 26th. It's for, again, the purposes of gaining feedback on this project and our code updates. And so I encourage you to go to the city's website. Under latest news, there's a link to that survey. Shouldn't take too long to fill out, but it's really valuable feedback for us to hear from you, and can also enter in to win a gift card for those who choose to participate in that. So please take advantage of that and fill out that survey for us. Also, I wanted to let folks know that this is kind of a two-phase process. We're in the phase one part of the project right now, in the early stages. So we're developing a plan of action, so to speak. In the next phase, we'll actually get into the code writing and adoption. So we encourage you to stay tuned through the project website to learn more about what's going on and keep track of that. And we also have a place to sign up for getting future notifications about this project. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Sarah Breakstone. Sarah is our planning consultant that is helping guide the city through this effort. And she comes to us with a wealth of experience and knowledge in helping cities like Monmouth update their codes. So she has a little PowerPoint slide show prepared for us, and we'll go ahead and make her the presenter so she can share that.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. Again, good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Breakstone. I'm a senior planner and project manager with a company called OTAC in Portland, and I have spent a pretty good part of my career as a planning consultant doing this kind of work, helping smaller jurisdictions in Oregon update their comprehensive plans and their zoning codes to achieve their identified objectives. So happy to be doing this work in Monmouth. And let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. That appears to have worked. The problem that I have is that whenever I do this, I can no longer see everybody. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can change this configuration. Okay, well, I can see some people. I can't see everybody. So Suzanne and Stacy, maybe, or Suzanne and Liz, maybe you can just help monitor the screens to see if anybody's got their hand raised or if somebody's trying to speak. Just let me know in case I miss it. Great. So again, I'm Sarah. With me tonight is Stacy Goldstein with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. She manages the grant. This project is being funded through a grant from the Transportation and Growth Management Program, and I'll let Stacy talk a little bit about that in a minute. And of course, on our team is also Suzanne Duffner and Liz Pongratz, who is the city's new associate planner. So just a quick background, Suzanne kind of touched on it. This is the city's undertaking amendments to its zoning code to support and implement some kind of high-level policy objectives that have been under discussion at the city. This project takes place in 2 phases. Suzanne mentioned that we're in the first phase. So really, we're evaluating or auditing the existing zoning code now, along with some other relevant planning documents to really understand where amendments might be needed in the code to support the city's objectives for this work. And also taking the time to talk with the planning commissioners, the city councilors. We've done some stakeholder interviews and of course are having this community open house tonight to try to get as much perspective on the work as possible and really understand what the city's priorities and concerns are. So the end result of this phase will be an action plan that outlines the specific code amendments that the city can undertake with phase 2. So this phase really sets the city up to, in phase 2, really launch right into drafting code amendments that will get adopted into the code. And again, with that second phase, there's another round of community engagement and stakeholder engagement, and then that's followed up with the public adoption process with the Planning Commission and City Council. So with that, I think, Stacy, if you could maybe just give us a quick introduction or overview of what the Transportation and Growth Management Program is and what it aims to do.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Goldstein. Welcome. Thank you all for attending this evening. I am a land use transportation planner and project manager for the state of Oregon. Specifically the Code Assistance Program. And just a little background, the Code Assistance Program is funding this project. And the program helps local governments to update their local regulations to promote efficient land use, transportation options, and it really does this with an emphasis on pedestrian-friendly development and also bicycle-friendly communities. This program, the Code Assistance Program, falls under the umbrella, if you will, of the Oregon Transportation and Growth Management Program, which is a partnership between ODOT and the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And again, they strive for building livable communities with transportation options and housing variety for all folks. And with that, again, thank you for being here with us to help us work through this project.
Thanks, Stacy.
You bet.
So quick logistics. I think Suzanne covered some of it, but please try to remember to keep yourself on mute so we're not getting a lot of background noise. If you have a comment or a question, you can raise your hand if you're on camera. We will hopefully see you. You can also use the chat function. If that's not working, just speak up and we will stop and discuss, answer questions. We are recording this conversation mostly to make it easier for me to take notes when it's over. And these slides and other information about the project can be found also on the city's website. And at the end of the slideshow, I'll also put up the link to the survey that's happening right now, so you can see that. So just a quick overview of some of the project objectives. So as I mentioned, the city's having some policy discussions right now, primarily around housing and economic development, economic growth. And those policy objectives really line up well with the mission of the Transportation and Growth Management Program. So we'll be looking for ways to infuse smart growth principles into the Monmouth Zoning Code, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by smart growth principles in a minute. We are interested in helping Monmouth broaden the range of housing choices that are available in Monmouth. We are specifically looking at what we call the missing middle housing types, and those are the types of housing that fall between a standard sort of detached single family home and a multifamily apartment building. It's kind of everything in between there. So duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, cottage clusters, those kinds of developments is kind of the focus of the housing work that we're doing with this project. We are, of course, trying to encourage and support economic development, and I'll talk a little bit more about some specific ways that we are doing that. Along similar lines, creating new and improved building design standards, particularly for residential development and new commercial development in your downtown district. And generally trying to provide, trying to make the zoning code a little bit more streamlined, maybe improve some of the organization and make it a more user-friendly document that is easy for people to interpret and easier for people to navigate through. So when we talk about smart growth principles, we're really talking about planning at the intersection of land use and transportation and thinking about how those two different realms interact with each other. And it has a lot to do with using your land efficiently. So looking at an area and thinking, what is the highest and best use for this land? And how can we mesh the transportation and the land use system together to get there? Encouraging more mixed use development in appropriate places is certainly one of the smart growth principles, and planning for multimodal transportation options. So really considering how to plan for bicycles and pedestrians, and maybe shift the focus somewhat from vehicles to those other modes of transportation. Vehicles are, of course, always considered and accommodated, but maybe the focus is a little bit more on the pedestrian realm and the bicycle realm. And again, sort of trying to create, particularly, in a downtown Main Street district, really trying to create a sort of human-scaled, pedestrian-friendly environment, and moving towards more complete neighborhoods or more complete communities where people can live, they can work, they can shop, they can eat, and they can do it all, meet a lot of their daily needs with less reliance on a vehicle. So those are kind of the things that we're talking about when we talk about smart growth principles. And to the extent that those can be implemented into a zoning code, that's a big part of the TGM program. Excuse me. So getting into the meat of it, one of the things that we are looking at with this project is ways that we can expand the types of housing that are permitted in the residential zones in Monmouth. Again, we're really focused on some of these missing middle housing types, and sort of broadening the range of housing types that are allowed in each, in your low density zone, your medium density zone, and your high density zone. And some of these housing types are permitted. The city permits duplexes now, it permits row houses now, but they're somewhat limited in where they can be built, and the process for building them is more cumbersome and complex than it is for building a single family detached home, for example. So specifically, we are proposing that the city allow duplexes and cottage clusters in the low density residential zone. In the medium density residential zone, we are proposing that duplexes, cottage clusters, triplexes, townhomes, and very small scale multifamily, so less than 6 units, that those uses all be permitted outright in your medium density zone, and that pretty much the broad range of housing types be allowed in your high density zone, with the exception of single detached homes and duplexes, because those are typically not appropriate uses for a high density zone. Those tend to be lower density developments. So those are the types of amendments that we're looking at now. And along with that, we are looking at some adjustments to the development standards that apply in those residential zones. And by development standards, I mean things like lot sizes, setbacks, lot coverage standards, things that regulate how housing fits on a lot. The general idea there is to allow flexibility so that these housing types that we're proposing can be built. You know, it's one thing to allow them, but you also need to have appropriate development standards in your code to support them and facilitate their development. So that's what we're looking at there. The city is interested in exploring the notion of potentially increasing densities in the residential zones. Potentially just the high density residential zone, but I think there is some discussion about increasing densities across the board, and I'm sure that those are conversations that we will continue to have. Last but not least, thinking about ways to provide incentives for affordable housing development. And when I say affordable, I mean like regulated affordable housing development that's hitting a certain threshold. Incentives could include things like a density bonus. So if your project would be allowed to build additional units if a certain percentage of those were affordable units. You could also look at a height bonus. So you could have an extra story on your building if your project was accommodating affordable housing. So those are a couple additional things that we are looking at. Probably a lot of information about housing. I think I'll stop there and just see if there are questions. I know one thing that the city is interested in hearing from its citizens is, you know, what types of housing would you like to see more of in Monmouth that you're not seeing now and that you think that there is a need for? So I'll stop talking there and see if there are comments from anyone. I see a hand up from Maggie. You're on mute, Maggie. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there an incentive for building handicap type homes or homes that are easily wheelchair accessible and that sort of thing?
That's a good question. I don't think that there is anything in your zoning code about that. There may be other city programs. I'm not sure. Maybe Suzanne could speak to that.
So there's not any programs that I'm aware of to incentivize that right now, but I think that, Maggie, that's a really good point, that maybe that's part of our affordable housing discussion on how we can encourage that, because I know there is more demand, right, with the baby boomers retiring out, that we're seeing a demand, I think, for more types of accessible and one single story units. So I think that's something definitely to take note of, and see if there's a way to, if it's not in the code, maybe in some of our incentives in terms of our fees, of how to encourage more of that.
I was just thinking, I'm sure that there are disabled people who would like to live on their own, but they can't unless there's some kind of housing that can accommodate that without them having to reinvent the wheel in an apartment or home or townhome. And I was just wondering if that was something we could address for our future planning, because I do think that's something we should be cognizant of.
Very good point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other comments? I'm not seeing hands. See if I can.
Oh, I think there was
This is
one.
Brandon.
I have a
Hi, Brandon Schmidl here. I think part of my difficulty in responding to this question is that I'm not familiar with your current zones and requirements, and maybe I missed an earlier document or something for us to review prior to the meeting. Anecdotally, I'm fairly new to the area, and I think the only suggestion I would see in the Monmouth specific area relates to the sprawl that I'm starting to see. So something in the higher density would be an interest for me, just personally my own opinion.
So sorry, I'm there's a very strange echo happening. Oh, maybe it's gone. So Brandon, if I understood, you were saying that you see a need for higher density residential development in the city to kind of tamp down on the potential for sprawl?
Yes,
Okay.
That's exactly what I was saying.
Understood, thank you. For context, while we're on the topic of density, your high density residential zone now has a maximum of, I want to say, I'm going to get this wrong, 20 dwelling units per acre. Is that correct, Suzanne? Okay, yeah. So right now, the highest density that you could have in the city is 20 dwelling units per acre, unless you did some sort of like planned unit development that might offer the potential for a little bit more than that. But are there other comments? I
have one.
see a hand up from Linda.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I was wondering, I know the code is pretty restrictive on building a second house on a property, like a mother-in-law quarters or perhaps a tiny home.
Yeah.
I was wondering if that's going to be loosened any to make it a little more feasible for families to add a second home when they have.
Yes, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. Yeah, we are looking at the city's ADU standards, which is the standards for those accessory dwelling units, and doing a couple of things there, making sure that they are flexible enough to actually facilitate some of that development, and also making sure that they comply with state law, because there is some relatively new state law around ADUs, and we want to make sure that the city is up to speed with that. And the city has also specifically expressed some interest in tiny house development and ways to potentially facilitate that in the zoning code. So we'll be looking at both of those things.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure. Let's see.
I know there was one other person who had their hand up for a moment when you first opened the floor. I don't know if they wish to turn the camera back on and ask a question. I'm afraid I don't remember who it was.
I'm not seeing any more. Any last thoughts? While we're on the slide, I'd like to point out that these are photos that were taken by your city councilor, Christopher Lopez, and these are some middle housing types that are in Monmouth now. So thank you for that, Councilor Lopez. Okay, let's move on. I don't see any more comments. Again, looking at ways that we can adjust the zoning code to promote or support or encourage economic growth and development. One of the things that we're looking at is streamlining the land use approval process for certain types of projects by creating some clear and objective standards. And what I mean by clear and objective are standards that are measurable. They have a numeric component to them. When you are looking at a project and trying to understand whether or not it complies with a standard, it's a very simple yes or no. You either do or you don't. That is a clear and objective standard. And What's happening now in the city is a lot of projects are going through a discretionary review with the Planning Commission because there are not clear and objective standards that can be applied. For some projects, if there were clear and objective standards that they could meet, they could avoid that sort of timely and more costly process and instead go through an administrative review, which is where their application would be reviewed by city staff. And it's a very simple kind of go through and check the list. Yeah, they meet this one, they meet this one, they meet this one. And it adds a lot more certainty for the applicant. It's a more efficient use of your planning commission, more efficient use of your city staff. Just allows the approval process to be more streamlined. So what we're talking about doing is creating some clear and objective standards for certain types of development, particularly residential development, commercial development, and potentially industrial development. So if we can create some clear and objective standards for those types of projects, then we can have a more streamlined time review process for applicants. And that's something that the city would like to be able to offer. We're also looking at the potential for allowing some small scale commercial uses in the medium and high density residential zones. Right now, no types of commercial uses are permitted in the residential zones. And what I mean by small scale is really corner store, coffee shop, bakery, neighborhood serving type uses that are not competing with or drawing energy away from your downtown commercial district, but are really intended to serve the immediate neighborhood. And when you take this approach, you can be very specific in your code about what types of uses are allowed. So it can be, cafes, it can be small stores, it can be small personal service, maybe small office space types uses. So you can very clearly specify what types of uses you mean, and you can also limit them in terms of size and apply whatever standards you think are appropriate for them. So that's something that the city has expressed interest in exploring, and we've heard some support for that approach. So we'll continue to look at that. We're also looking at developing some standards to regulate food carts and food cart pods. We understand there's some interest in having more of that type of use in the city, but right now there really aren't any zoning code standards that would apply to them. And so I think the city's interested in having some fairly basic safety and aesthetic standards so that the food carts and the cart pods are meeting a certain level of quality and not detracting from your kind of nice downtown environment. So again, a lot of information for one slide. These are some of the things that we're talking about in terms of economic development. Are there questions or comments about any of that? I know one of the things the city is interested in understanding, and this is also on the online survey as well, is are you interested in having, would you be interested in having some small neighborhood serving commercial uses in your neighborhood? And if so, what types of businesses would you like to see there? Any thoughts about that? Let me scroll through and see if I see hands up. Not seeing. Am I missing anybody?
I'd like to say that I would enjoy having more local community-run businesses around me.
Great, thank you. I know that my neighborhood has a little market up the street and a bakery up the street, and it's great. It's a short walk, and it's not necessarily meeting my daily or weekly grocery needs, but it's a great option to have for last minute purchases.
I agree.
Anyone else have any thoughts about this one?
ahead. Raise your hand. There's a hand over here.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes.
I was just gonna mention if there was a way to acknowledge maybe a way for nonprofits to have spaces.
That's always a great approach to take. That's not something that could probably be addressed in the zoning code, except maybe through some sort of incentive program. But I think that there are other city programs that can be applied to facilitate nonprofit space. I'm just not sure that the zoning code would be the best place to try to make something like that happen.
Seems that,
Commissioner Howard?
yeah, so it seems that in some ways, if we're talking about small scale office space being a permitted use in medium and high density residential, then nonprofits would probably naturally fit into that. I don't think that our zoning code will have to specify that you're a money making organization. It's more of a use-based determination. But that's
Yeah.
a very interesting point, and I don't think we've been talking about it. So thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, a lot of what you can do with your zoning code is provide opportunity. But sometimes you need other programs in place to give the push to turn opportunity into reality. And sometimes that's where zoning codes tend to fall a little short, unfortunately. Are there other comments or questions? Okay. Not seeing any, so I will move on. So I want to talk about residential design standards. So when I say residential design, I'm talking about the actual buildings themselves and how they look. Right now, the zoning code in Monmouth has some standards that apply to some kinds of residential development, but it's pretty inconsistent. What we're looking at is providing a basic set of residential design standards that would apply across the board to all new residential development, whether it's a new neighborhood or infill development, whether it's a single family home or a set of row houses. And the intent with these standards is really to ensure kind of a basic level of quality and a basic level of sort of visual interest, and really trying to move toward, you know, those kind of comfortable pedestrian oriented neighborhoods where people feel comfortable walking. And a lot of that has to do with how houses kind of address the street and address the sidewalk and how they're oriented and what kind of things are on the facade that's facing the street. So that's kind of what we're looking at when we talk about residential design standards. So it has to do with garage size and garage placement. So making sure that the front of the house isn't completely dominated by this big blank garage door. I think we've all seen developments like that. We're looking at requiring a certain amount of landscaping, requiring that the homes have front entrances that are facing the sidewalk, looking at what setbacks are appropriate and building heights. Also thinking about building articulation. So things like dormers and offsets and recesses, things to make the facade of homes a little more visually interesting, so you're not getting a bunch of essentially sort of flat blank walls. There's usually, you know, a need to strike a balance here. You know, we want to implement standards that are achieving a certain level of quality, but we don't want to go overboard and put in a bunch of design standards that are difficult to meet and are basically going to serve as a barrier to new development. And so this is always a consideration when we're looking at new design standards, particularly for housing. So we'll be looking at that more and trying to make sure that we're striking that balance as we go into actually creating the design standards in the next phase. Thoughts about any of that? Are there things that strike you as really important when you talk about residential design and neighborhoods and elements that you think really lend themselves to a nice feeling neighborhood or potentially detract from a nice feeling neighborhood? Any thoughts about that? Or questions?
Can you explain what you mean by the garage size and placement a little more specifically?
Sure. Often what we recommend is that you have a standard that says the area of your garage door cannot be more than the area of the rest of the house. So if you're just looking at the front facade, you have kind of the plane that is the front of the house and you have the plane that is the garage door, and it's making sure that the garage door is secondary to the primary dwelling and also potentially set back a little bit. So you don't want the garages jutting out in front of the rest of the house, because then they become the dominant thing that you see when you look at the house. So it's about both of those things. And there's usually it's usually a percentage, like the garage facade can't be more than 50% of the total facade of the house, and it needs to be in line with or set back from the rest of the house, things like that. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, but that's the general idea.
So are you also encouraging to have less setbacks than what's been in the process currently?
I believe what we are recommending is generally reduced setbacks. I'm not remembering the details of each individual zone, but I think generally that's the approach, to reduce setbacks, to do two things, to make it more feasible to build some of these new housing types, especially as your lot sizes get smaller. It's important to have slightly less setbacks so that you can actually fit, homes on a site. And also to make sure that homes are up closer to the sidewalk and really kind of creating that nice sort of row of houses along the sidewalk, or that sort of neighborhood feel, I guess.
Sarah, can you clarify? I think that what we're talking about, though, are minimum setbacks, not maximum setbacks.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we have, you have minimum setback requirements in your code now, and I think generally we have recommended reducing those. Although maybe not in every single zone. That would be the approach. I see a question in the chat. Please talk about adequate parking as part of residential design standards. Yes, that's always an important consideration that tends to generate a lot of conversation. So with these new housing types, we will also be recommending new parking standards to go with them. I'm not remembering exactly what's in your code now, but I do know that we have recommended some adjustments to parking standards, potentially for, I'm not sure what you have it for duplexes now or for single family. But yeah, we certainly look at parking, and there's always quite a bit of concern about parking. And we understand that that will also be a concern in Monmouth, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation about that, but there will be new parking standards that come with the new housing types.
I apologize, I don't know how to sit there and raise my hand on the GoToMeeting app, so I'm asking questions.
That's fine, go for it.
So the building height mass is that some of the developments that are around have limited height requirements. Are you suggesting that if that development has had a limited height that we're going to be allowed to increase that?
Potentially. Again, I'm not remembering the specifics of what's in your code now, but I think for certain housing types, like if a triplex or potentially row houses, there may be a need to increase your building height maximum in your medium and high density zones to facilitate some of those types of developments. Other questions?
if this, yeah, I have one.
Oh, go ahead. Thank you.
I don't know if this pertains to this, but what comes to my mind when you're talking about all this is there going to be a standard or code that says you can't have big boats and big RVs in the front of the house?
Well, yeah, that's probably there now. That's not typically part of the zoning code. That's usually part of the municipal code. And I suspect that you have that kind of language in your code now, and it's really a matter of enforcement. But Suzanne could probably speak to that.
Yeah, actually, our standards are pretty lax on that. If it's parked in a driveway now and it's not spilling over into the sidewalk, that is considered a legal parking space. We regulate more of the street parking portion of it and not parking in the front yard. So I think it may be something that we want to take a look at, whether or not it's part of this code update project, because we've got a pretty full, plate of things that we're trying to address. It almost could be its own separate
Its own
one.
project.
Yeah, looking at that standards.
I was basically thinking of the garage size and placement. When people build, sometimes they want extra room to park all of that stuff. And I'm just saying, is that going to be a standard where we don't widen the driveways or widen the garages because of that?
Great, thank you. Other comments or questions? I'm getting a lot of background noise. Can we make sure that everyone is muted? I don't know if Liz, or Suzanne, if you could mute people. Thank you. Okay. I think we are ready to move on.
I do have another question.
Oh, please go ahead. Yeah.
We had an issue with, we have what they're called like false dandelions, and we're planting a lot of flowers for the pollinators, and we were cited for not cutting down the dandelions, even though our lawn was low. I don't understand why there's an issue with the tall dandelions.
That again is not a zoning code issue.
Okay.
There may be, do you live in a neighborhood that has CC&Rs, or is this a
No,
city?
we're a block off of 99.
Okay. Yeah, again, that's probably got something to do with what's in the municipal code, and it's usually an enforcement issue. So I unfortunately can't really speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before I move on? Okay. Similar to the last slide, the city is interested in thinking about some new and improved design standards for commercial development in the downtown district. Your code has some design standards now, and I think the concern that I've heard from various parties is that even with the design standards that are in place now, there is still the potential to get development that doesn't quite meet expectations for downtown development. And it's possible that maybe there need to be new and or different ways of regulating design in the downtown district. And so we'll be looking at that a little bit more in phase 2, thinking about what types of things need to be regulated more or differently, what types of standards are appropriate. Does the city want to think about some sort of theme that needs to be applied in the downtown district so that projects that come in are really complementary of and consistent with the kind of nice historic character that your downtown Main Street area has now? So these are kind of things that we'll be looking at. Are there thoughts about your downtown area and design elements that you think should be emphasized, things that you should be think should be de-emphasized, or are there projects that you particularly like that you would like to see that character or that theme sort of expanded into new projects? I know that this is something that your planning commission is particularly interested in, and most development that happens downtown goes to your planning commission for their review and approval. And so I think the commissioners are interested in having some better design standards to work with when those projects come to them. Thoughts about that? I don't want to put you on the spot, Commissioner Howard, but is there anything you wanted to add about this particular one? Oh, he might be gone.
No, I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't. I think you've captured it well. I think there's been a couple of projects that have come through in the last 10 years. And the design standards aren't bad from sort of a spirit of the law sort of thing, but I think that in terms of theme and feel, I know that a number of commissioners have expressed a wish to have something more concrete that they can work with. So I think you've captured it well.
Okay, thanks. Any comments? Ideas? I see a chat. Please address earthquake safety and design concerns. Yeah, that's a big one for me. Having worked in a very unreinforced building in downtown Portland for many, many years. That, again, I sound like a broken record, is not something that gets addressed in the zoning code. That's part of your building code. And I'm not sure what the city has in place now in terms of seismic upgrades or resiliency. Do you have any sense of that, Suzanne?
So right now, we follow the Oregon Building Code, which for new buildings that will apply. We don't have any additional city standards on top of that would make it stricter for development or retrofits. In our urban renewal area, though, that we do have some incentive fees, I think, though, to be able to help if a property owner is wanting to go through that voluntarily to upgrade the seismic nature of their building. But yeah, we're following the state building codes in terms of the seismic requirements right now, at least.
Thanks. Any other comments? Okay, I will go on. I think this is the last slide. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, one of the objectives of this project is to really just clean up the code as much as we can and provide some streamlining, maybe some better organization, and try to do things to make it more user-friendly, both for city staff and for applicants who are trying to navigate through it. One of the things that we've heard from city staff is that there is a need to look at your commercial and employment zones, your industrial zones, and think about ways to do some streamlining there. As an example, right now you have 5 commercial zones in Monmouth. Each one of them has a long and very specific detailed list of uses that are permitted in those zones. And in some cases, the lists are very similar to each other. And so the distinction between some of the commercial zones is not readily apparent, I guess. And there may be some opportunities to think about ways to combine commercial zones, maybe down into just 3, which is potentially a more appropriate number of commercial zones for a town the size of Monmouth. So that's something that we'll be looking at. And in line with that, thinking about ways to maybe move away from these long, detailed lists of specific uses for your commercial and industrial zones, because what ends up happening is you have a applicant who wants to build a project and he's trying to figure out, you know, where this specific use fits, and that specific use that they're proposing isn't listed under any of the zones. And so it becomes this very unclear, difficult process to try to understand if their specific use could be permitted or not. And there's not really a good process for that now. And what happens is oftentimes use lists get kind of sporadically updated over the years to accommodate specific situations. And then you just end up after a period of time with these long, messy lists of uses, and they make it difficult for everybody. So what we're thinking about is using use categories. These are broad categories of uses that you can list in your zones. Each category is very well defined. It has a lot of examples of things that would fall within that category. It also has lists of specific things that are not considered part of that category. But what that does is when a person comes in and they have a use they want to propose, they can look at the use categories, and it's usually pretty clear which category their use will fit in. And if there's any question, there's a very simple determination that can be made by city staff to figure out which category to put their use in. So it tends to provide, even though it's a more vague approach to uses, it actually provides more certainty for applicants, and it makes it easier for city staff to do the interpretation of where a use fits. So that's something we'll be looking at for both the commercial and the industrial zones, because they both have pretty unwieldy lists of uses right now. Also looking at implementing some neighborhood meeting requirements in the zoning code. Neighborhood meetings are meetings that take place between a potential applicant, the developer, and neighbors in the area surrounding their project site. And this is an early meeting. It happens before they submit their land use application to the city, and it provides an opportunity for the developer to talk to the neighbors, hear their concerns, respond to their concerns, and it gives neighbors an early opportunity to know what's coming and understand what projects are being built in their neighborhood, but also it gives them an opportunity to feel like they can be somewhat more involved and listened to, and it can support just sort of better relationships all around. And then when the developer submits their application to the city, they have to include documentation that they held this neighborhood meeting according to the standards that are set up for them to do so. And a lot of times what you see is that if you have this kind of like early neighborhood meeting, it helps to reduce the potential for delays and or appeals during the public review process. That's the idea, is that you handle some of those issues that are going to come up on the front end rather than when you're actually in your public review. And you can do this a lot of different ways. You can require neighborhood meetings for certain kinds of projects. Typically what you'll see is neighborhood meetings are required for anything that's going to go to the planning commission or the city council, but not necessarily for something that's just going to be a staff decision. So that's one way to approach it. Or you can require a neighborhood meeting for specific types of applications, like a conditional use application. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. There's lots of different requirements you can put in there. Lots of examples of cities that do this. So, you know, lots of good examples to pull from. So we'll be looking at that. Last but not least, making some changes to your home occupation permits to make it easier to get a permit. Particularly if you are a home occupation that doesn't have customers coming to visit you at your home, basically. I think the recommendation there is that if you are a home occupation or home-based business, you won't be required to get a permit if you don't have customers coming to the home. And I think this is sort of particularly relevant in the COVID world that we're in now, where home-based businesses are becoming much more of a thing. And many of us are working from home in some capacity. So these are some of the things we're talking about in terms of streamlining and making your zoning code more user-friendly. Are there any questions about that, or thoughts about other things? You know, maybe some of you have had experiences dealing with or around the zoning code. If there's things that you think would make it easier to navigate or understand, be happy to hear those as well.
Hello, this is Brian Sparks on the telephone. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I can hear you.
I wanted to comment. I have read through some what I believe are code recommended code changes, particularly to density in the single-family zone.
Okay.
And I think that I read the proposal is to continue the current 6 dwellings per acre provision. And I had provided some comments to Liz previously on this. The issue that I have a piece of development property, and I've had 2 builders contact me who are interested in both building single-family residential, which is the zone, but also to incorporate some, I'll call them detached row houses, for lack of a better term. Apparently something that's being built in other areas. But the issue that they were concerned with is the dwellings per acre. If a duplex is 2 dwellings, and you still can only have per acre, you could only put 3 duplexes on an acre. But I thought the intent of the rule change was to have somebody's getting it higher density as a result of being able to put duplexes or row houses in the single-family residential zone. From what I'm told, the builders are saying, well, if I still have to maintain the same density, then I'll, building single-family residences won't make sense because you're going to use up the same amount of development ground in building 3 duplexes or 6 houses, and there's obviously more profitability from their perspective than building 6 houses.
Sure.
And I said, well, I'll track what the code change suggestions are, but it would, based on their input, it sounds as though you're not going to get duplex row house kind of changes in the single family zone if in fact the density issues aren't going to change, or if the minimum density doesn't go down. If you had a detached row house on a 4,000 square foot lot, that would change that dynamic, but you're still going to be stuck with the 6 dwellings per acre provision. So it seems like allowing more flexibility but not changing the zoning density frustrates the intent of the change to allow some of the duplexes or row houses in the single family zone. Just an observation and commentary that I've had from, I'm not a builder, so but that was commentary that they had given me.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and something that we will always consider. We hadn't really talked a whole lot about increasing the maximum density in the low density zone, which is the one that has a maximum of 6 units per acre, which I believe is what you're talking about. there appeared to be more interest in raising densities for the medium and high density zones, but I think all three are sort of on the table at this point in terms of additional discussions with the city. And you're right that if you're opening up your residential zones and trying to encourage some of these additional housing types, it may necessitate looking at your densities and making sure that where your density standards are still allows these kinds of developments to occur. What I've seen in other cities, and this is something that when you are building these middle housing types, you calculate density differently for them. And so, for example, if you want to build a triplex, you don't apply your maximum density to the triplex. You basically don't apply maximum densities to the middle housing types. And so that allows you don't have to change your density standards, but you're getting kind of like a de facto density bonus if you're building middle housing types. And that's the approach that I've seen some towns take. And so that's something we can consider. You can do it other ways too. You can kind of lay out your code the way you want to. You can say a duplex only counts as one when you're calculating density. So there are things that you can do to work that flexibility in so that these housing types can be built.
I believe that I saw in one document that each dwelling unit in that age was like 0.5. My thought was if each dwelling unit in a duplex unit accounted for 0.75 of a dwelling, then that would be a tool where you still keep the 6 units per acre, but you count the 2 halves of a duplex, for instance, or a row house type of thing differently. And same thing, if the minimum lot size is 5,000, if the minimum lot size for a duplex could be 4,000 per unit, then that again provides some flexibility to gain a little more density. But the other tool it gives you is if you have odd lot sizes or things of that nature, gives you a tool within the code to be able to use smaller lot sizes in the process.
Yeah.
Again, both of these builders that I had talked with came to me because they knew I had property that was able to be developed, and both of them built in Dallas and/or in Monmouth, both multifamily and single family. So they're kind of familiar with the area and the options and alternatives. And I simply told them that I would follow this latest code update and try and figure out what options might be in that process.
Yeah, that's great. I would encourage you to continue to track this project, because when we move into phase 2 and we actually start proposing new code language, that's going to be very important, because it's almost certainly going to include changes that are going to impact your land and how it can be developed. So good to stay tuned.
The flip side of this, of course, is some folks don't want the lower density, so perhaps some constraints, like 20% of the units in a single family zone, no more than that can be duplex type property. Again, there are ways to protect the single family zone, but still allow some flexibility in that process. And with the intent of, if we use up less land, we can ideally have more affordable housing in that process. I think that's the opportunity in duplexes, but not every builder wants to build 5 acres of duplexes.
Sure.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so I don't know if everybody on the call is aware of this, but within the last couple of years, the state has required cities of a certain size to allow duplexes, and Monmouth is in single family zones, and Monmouth is right on the cusp. We'll know after the census that one of the reasons we're working this into this code update is we expect to have passed the threshold, if not immediately within the next couple of years.
And the threshold for reference is 10,000 people.
10,000.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think going back to a conversation we had earlier this evening, the idea that the difference between allowing something and enabling it, I think it's probably the case that the state regulations, the spirit of the state regulations is to enable multifamily, duplexes and so forth in the single family zone, not merely allow it. So I think Brian's comments about making sure it pencils out makes sense.
Absolutely. Any other comments? All right. I will move on. So what are we doing next? As we mentioned, there is an online survey happening now, and the website is up on the screen, and you can also find it if you just go to the city's website. I'm sure it's listed up there. There's an English version and a Spanish version, and really encourage everybody to go take the survey. It's quick, maybe 20 questions, covering some of the same information that we talked about tonight, but with some additional questions in there. That survey will be up for 2 weeks, I believe, and then we'll be pulling all of the input from that survey and working it into the final action plan, which is slated to be complete probably somewhere around late March. And then we'll have a city council work session in early April, and we will start planning for phase 2, which is when we actually begin to draft code language to adopt into your code. And that process will probably be about a 9-month process, if I had to guess. We haven't quite scoped out the project or the schedule yet, but typically 9 months is kind of where they land. So that's where we are going. One last slide. If you would like to sign up for future notifications about this project, there's a few things you can do. You can just put your name and email in the chat right now. You can send an email to Liz, and her email address is listed there, or you can just call the city at the number. Any of those things, if you want to get on the city's list so that anytime there's a project update, you will get notified. And I'll just leave that slide up and thank everyone for being here tonight. And I really appreciate your time and your comments and your feedback. And stay tuned for more information. And I hope everybody has a great night. Bye. Suzanne, do you want me to hang on for anything, or are we all set?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe just in case there's any stragglers that had a few comments or questions.
Sure. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how. There we go.
Well, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I know these aren't easy to do these days when everyone's remote, but great information.
Thank you. Yeah, it'd be nice to do one of these in person one day again, but I'm sure that time is coming. Maybe not soon, but we'll get there.
With the new stipulation on our county, is it going to allow us to have meetings now yet?
No, I think we're still in the high risk category.
Yeah, but
So was that March? End of. Oh, sorry, Mayor.
So we just have to limit the number of people at them. Hey, tomorrow night, parents will be able to go watch their children play football. So,
That's cool. I see all these pictures of parents sitting in their cars with binoculars trying to like look out onto the field to see their kid.
yeah. So new guidance came out just today about what schools can do for that. So always have to take care of sports first.
Is the survey currently live on the website?
I believe so.
I'm having trouble finding it. I'm clicking around a little bit, and I'm sure it's the deficit is on my end here. But could someone guide me to where that is?
It should be on the Code Assistance Project website. You might have to scroll down. It's
Oh.
like towards the middle.
So I'm clicking on the Code Assistance Open House. Oh, there you go. It's just further down. Not able to attend the meeting, fill out the survey.
Right.
Now, do we want folks that did attend the meeting to fill out the survey as well? I mean, I'm just thinking, it's kind of buried. Is there some way to make this a little bit more accessible?
Yeah, it's also on the the main website page under latest news, and I'm going to put in the chat a direct link there, so you should just be able to click on that, and that will take you to the SurveyMonkey link. But yeah, hopefully that will.
Where's the latest news?
The latest news, if you're on the city homepage, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just under the ribbon that has agendas and minutes. There's a green tab that says news and announcements on the left-hand side of the page.
Yeah.
March 11th virtual open house code assistance project.
That's where I found it, and I guess I was saying that it still seems a little buried. The verbiage that it says is not able to attend the meeting, then fill out the survey. So it's kind of buried down there. But I know there's a lot of stuff that has to be on the website. So
sure, no, that's a good point. We can maybe just highlight now that we've had the open house. We'll make it more specific to the fill out the online survey. But yeah, thanks. That's good feedback.
And I understand you're going to do some like social media posts and kind of do some other things to advertise the survey as well.
Yeah, we've done just the one reminder that announced it as well, that it was open, that went out this morning. But yeah, we'll have at least a couple of more on Facebook and Nextdoor. And try to incentivize folks with the chance to win a free gift card to a local business, Monmouth business. So,
great idea.
You can just put down if you're having trouble, you can go to Chris's house and he'll help you.
Oh yeah, and that would be a really cruel joke because I don't utilize social media, so I'd never even know you did it.
You would be no help, right? All right,
So
well, I don't
the
see.
recording, are we going to link the recording now, Suzanne? Because now you could say, here's a recording and take the survey, right? Rather than, yes, I can attend or no.
Yeah, that's a great idea. The recording, they'll be on our YouTube channel, and then we can have the link right there along with it, so folks can listen in. I know that was something that Stephen Howard had asked me about. That was going to be available. There was it Lucky Mute Watershed Council was meeting tonight, so I know there might have been a couple of folks that weren't able to attend there too. So.
Yeah, it wasn't somebody that's affiliated with LWC as far as I know, just somebody in the community. If you can embed the video in the project page, that would probably be more accessible to people as well. I don't know what the software for the website allows.
Yeah, I'll have to explore that, see if that's an option with our website provider.
Suzanne, while I have you on the line, we are still scheduled for City Council work session on April 6th. Is that right? Is that confirmed? Okay.
Yep, that's still the plan. Trying to get it in there before budget, so.
And we have a PMT meeting to talk about it on the 17th,
Next week, right?
which is next week already. That's crazy. Okay, great.
Bye.
All right, well, I don't see any more lingering questions, so I'm going to say
I
goodnight
have-
unless there's.
I have one quick one
Sure, go
about
ahead.
the definition of tiny homes. I was speaking with a builder today, and this specific one was actually Idea Box outside of Salem there. And we're saying that tiny home in the and I'd never heard that. Is that terminology we should be concerned about when we craft these?
I don't know a whole lot about the way tiny homes are regulated. In my mind, I have a hard time.
built to and inspected by. But
Right.
it's still, like you said, a consternation between the recreational vehicle standards versus traditional housing standards. And like I said, we never really found a way forward other than giving people the opportunity to have them built and inspected. But they aren't being built that way.
Yeah, there's certainly a gap, and I think, you know, regulations are slow to respond, but there's enough interest, I think, that I think eventually there will be a more standardized way of permitting them or of addressing them in building codes. But my understanding is that right now it's kind of all over the place. So might be a can of worms, but if you want to open it and dig through it in the next phase, we can try.
My folks have now passed when I needed tiny housing options to have them live on the property or put one on my place in Detroit. So I'm past that need, but it's certainly an affordable way of housing. And particularly to add someone for, maybe you need a place for a parent like I did for 3 or 4 years and wasn't able to do that.